In this lesson, I will tell you how you can do lab work on VMware Workstation. While I was installing, I used one physical server, one router and one switch. I'm going to show you how to practice on VMware Workstation as I don't think everyone will have that many resources. In order to create this lab, I recommend your machine to have at least a 5, 8GB RAM and SSD hard disk. If your machine has a 8GB RAM, you can practice using the standalone deployment model. In other words, you install only one firewall and you can install this firewall and management server on the same device and run them as standalone. If your machine has more than 8GB of RAM, for example 16GB of RAM, you can use the distributed deployment model we used in the lab. You can install it by giving 4GB RAM to your firewalls and management server, and you can create your topology by installing a client in Istanbul and Ankara. Now I will open VMware Workstation and tell you how to lab on VMware Workstation. In VMware Workstation, we will set the WAN side to VMnet Bridge. We will set the Ethernet zeros of the firewalls we will install to VMnet Bridge and enable them to go to the Internet. We will set up VMnet 1 for Ethernet 1 of our firewall. In VMnet 2, we will use the 10.1.0.0 subnet for our web server. If you have the capacity to install the Ankara side on your computer, you can use VMnet 3 and Ankara as well. We will use VMnet Bridge for Ethernet 0 on the WAN side. Now let me tell you how to go to VMware Workstation and install it. When we open VMware Workstation, let's first set up our VM networks. From here, let's open the Virtual Network Editor by clicking Edit. Let's start making our settings by selecting Change Setting from here. When we click Change Setting, you can see that VMnet 0 is bridge network. Which subnet your computer is using will give you an IP from that subnet. When we click on VMnet 1, I set it as host only and its subnet is 172.16.0.0, and I disabled DHCP as well. I also disabled DHCP in VMnet 2 and specified it as host only. I also stated that it is 10.1.0.0 as a subnet. Now let's add a new network and we will use it in subnet in Ankara. I choose VMnet 3 and say OK. I disable DHCP and specify that I will only use host only. Here we will use the 192.168.20.0 subnet. I say OK. Now we have made our network settings. Let's start the installation by saying create a new virtual machine. Let's choose custom from here and say next. Let's get VMware Workstation 16. Let's say next. Let's continue by stating that we will show the operating system later. We choose Linux and we choose the version as Red Hat Enterprise Linux 664-bit. Let's give a name to our virtual machine here. Let it be a management server. Let's continue by saying next. Let's have 2 CPUs. Let's say next. Have 4 GB of RAM. Let's continue by saying next. Here we will use host-only network. Our management server will be on VMnet 1 and we'll use subnet 172.16.0.0. Let's keep this place in LSI logic. Let's continue by saying next. There is the create a new virtual disk option here. Let's continue by saying next. You can increase your hard disk here. Let it be 32 again. Let's continue by saying next. I say finish. Now our management server has been created. Let's add the ISO file that we will install by saying edit virtual machine from here. Let's choose our CD and show our ISO file from there. You can now start the installation. We adjusted our RAM, processor and hard disk. Let's set up our network from here. Let's choose custom and specify that we will use VMnet 1. VMnet 1 has 172.16.0.0 subnet. After setting up our network, we are done. Now let's set up our firewall. Let's go to the main page and say create virtual machine from here. I say next. I say next. Here again, I specify that we will determine the operating system later, and I say next. I choose Red Hat Enterprise Linux 664-bit and say next. Let's write it as firewall 1. Let's give it 2 CPUs, let's say next. Let's call it next after making it 4 GB. Let's do this bridge, we'll set other interfaces a little later. I say next. Let's finish our settings by doing next. Let's make it 32 GB. Now let's go and add other interfaces that we will use in our firewall. I say add from here. I select the network adapter and click finish. I add another one, select the network adapter and say Finish. This will be our first adapter Ethernet 0, our second adapter will be VMnet 1. We choose Custom and VMnet 1. This will be 172.16.0.0. Let's come to our third adapter. Here I choose Custom and VMnet 2. VMnet 2 has subnet 10.1.0.0. After saying OK, you can see your settings here. After making all the settings, let's mount our ISO file and then you can start the installation. We have already made the next settings in our previous lessons. You can continue the installation by looking there. Now let's go to Check Point's homepage and I'll show you where to download the ISO file. When we come to the main page of Check Point, let's click on the Support Center from here. Let's type R81 Fresh Install to search here on the page that opens. I hit Enter and search. From here we will download the R81 Gaia Fresh install by clicking on Download. You can download and install this file from here. That's all we're going to talk about in this lesson. See you in our next lesson. Bye.